Hello everybody, this is Sarah and I'm here with Gregory, Nagy and with Janet and Ellen to talk about the discussion questions for HeroesX version 12. And this week we're talking about hours 9 and 10. So I'll read the first question, hour 9, and this is, we have to imagine Greg is actually saying this. When I was a PhD student at Harvard, so many years ago, I once heard something most striking from my old teacher, John H. Finley, who was a stellar professor of ancient Greek literature. Odysseus, he said in one of his lectures, gets a good press only in the Odyssey. Well, he was certainly right in implying that Odysseus gets a bad press in ancient Greek tradition situated outside our Odyssey. That is to say, he is an incorrigible trickster, as anthropologists would say it, and he tends to violate social norms. Perhaps he can even violate moral norms. I cannot disagree with such formulations, but my question here is heading in a different direction. Can we say that Odysseus gets bad press even in our Odyssey? So, Janet, Helen, I think you were starting there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, there's a question from a participant, and this is the question. Is he a lesser hero because his delayed nostos is due to his extreme behavior, which is a different type of extreme behavior compared to the actions of Achilles?
Yes. That's a very wise question. I would say that the delay of his nostos, as distinct from the delay of other characters' nostoi, and I'm thinking especially of Menelaus, may not necessarily be an indication that he is any worse in his actions or any better than Achilles. That's my my tentative reaction, but there are other ways, of course, of putting it, which is that after all, the Odyssey is a mega epic, just as the Iliad is a mega epic. So there's a lot of prolongation of themes. Just as we might find it almost an exaggeration that we don't hear anything about Achilles after Rhapsody 1, and we have to wait all the way till Rhapsody 9 for Achilles ever to speak again. So also you might say that the prolongation of the Odyssey by way of the length of the Odyssey results in what some people might think is an accumulation of mistakes, bad judgment calls, maybe even moral lapses. But I think that is more a matter of the size of the epic, not necessarily what Odysseus does by comparison with other heroes. Maybe my best proof for what I'm claiming is that if you look at Ajax, I don't mean the greater Ajax, I mean the lesser Ajax. He is clearly a rapist. He does all sorts of other war crimes, and yet he gets killed much sooner than Odysseus. So I don't necessarily see the prolongation of Odysseus's travails as an indication of whether he's worse. Of course, you're going to say, well, at least Odysseus doesn't get killed, but maybe that also adds to my argument. Ajax, the lesser Ajax, does get killed, and a lot of other Achaean heroes get killed. How am I doing? I'm not necessarily happy with my answer, my reaction.
No, it's very clear.
maybe if we continue,
Yeah, let's
this will
continue.
help. Yes.
Yes.
One of the posters said, we call Odysseus trickster, wily, clever, crafty. These may have negative connotations for our readers. Perhaps for ancient Greeks, they might be something different.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yes, well, I agree that it's not. I agree that the epithets that Odysseus gets in the Odyssey are not necessarily what mark him as somebody that we consider a trickster anthropologically. I'm thinking more of the descriptions of his behavior, his violation of rules of conduct. And sometimes they're just purely etiquette. Sometimes they are really morally indefensible. But you see what I'm saying? I'm using the word trickster more as an anthropological term, the way Paul Radin, R-A-D-I-N, uses it in his book, The Trickster, where not just in Greek myths, but in a wide variety of myths worldwide that we can study cross-culturally, there are figures who are tricky and whose trickiness is in many ways violation of the social norms of the society that tells about these tricksters. And my favorite example is what Paul Radin in his book includes in his appendix. This is a lengthy appendix that retells a myth told by a Native American population called the Winnebago, who inhabit on the United States side of the Canadian-US border, Wisconsin, northern Minnesota. Anyway, there's a Winnebago myth about that people's trickster figure. And in this myth, the trickster violates every major social norm of the Winnebago people. Then after the story is told, it is almost as if the trickster takes off his mask as trickster and now, as a culture hero, goes through the entire narrative again and says what was done wrong at each step, so that the ultimate message is a positive one. Don't do A, don't do B, don't do C, all the way from A to Z.
So what I find interesting about that, Greg, is just as an immediate reaction is that
Yes.
Although Odysseus does some things wrong, his men do things wrong as well. And he's...
Yes. And in fact, his men make more mistakes. At least he doesn't try to rustle the cattle of the sun and then after rustling them, slaughter some of them and eat them, try to eat them. So I think you just raised an extremely important point, dear Sarah. Yeah, he's certainly not unique in any transgressions. It's just that when I say tricky, it also involves things like speaking out of order, things like not behaving as the guest should behave. My favorite example of the second point I just made is when he's an anonymous guest at the court of the Phaeacians, and there's this feast hosted by King Alkinoos, and apparently there's this huge sacrificial animal that has been cooked, and then you would expect the host to be the person who carves the meat. But there's this anonymous person. He hasn't even identified himself yet. He jumps up and he starts carving the meat. Yeah. The guest is behaving like the host. In the Iliad, my favorite example, but this verges in the direction of a moral infraction, is the plan that was devised by Nestor for the 3 emissaries to the shelter of Achilles. The plan had prescribed that the first speaker should be Phoenix. Then the second speaker presumably would be Odysseus, and the third speaker would be Ajax. Instead, what happens is when Ajax nods to Phoenix, the person who starts speaking is Odysseus. Wait a minute. The plan was for Phoenix to speak first. What's going on? And in that case, as I think some of our readers already know, the argument can be made that Odysseus is almost sabotaging the epic career of Achilles. That is to say, he tries to sabotage the epic career because he is presenting the offer of Agamemnon in a deceitful way, in a tricky way. Agamemnon had said, in planning the mission to the shelter of Achilles, that the goal of the ambassadors, the emissaries, was to talk Achilles into rejoining his comrades. And if he rejoins, that would be proof that he, Agamemnon, is superior to Achilles. Well, that part of Agamemnon's message is elided by Odysseus. He never says it. So it's almost as if it were a trap. And after all, doesn't Achilles say to Odysseus, I hate, like the gates of Hades, as someone who says one thing and means another thing? And that's our friend Odysseus.
Oh, doesn't he just? Yeah, we've got lies coming up as well. So, but then hidden within those lies, there are little snippets, and so he's very hard to read a lot of the time, isn't he? And I think that goes back to what you were talking about with the craftiness as well, that sometimes it can be a very positive force and sometimes a very negative force. Do you think there was sort of almost like a collective blame? We can't do without him, but we really don't like what he's done, and people almost disowning him.
I agree. It's just that when you read about Odysseus in tragedy, and I think this is what my old teacher had in mind, you can't find anywhere where he's a sympathical figure. I'll put it that way. Finley was not kidding when he said Odysseus has bad press. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, I have to admit that ultimately Odysseus gets good press. Why? Because the lies that he tells are not really lies in the context of the overall Odyssey. Why? Because the people he lies to are being tested. And after all, this is not, may I say it in modern terms, it's not lying under oath. It's simply engaging in a very complex code where people who are unqualified will not get it. People who are qualified will get it. Well, of course, the story of the Odyssey is people who are unqualified are the bad people who should be killed. And so that's why Odysseus seems 100% good. But even the way he slaughters the suitors, but that's going to be a separate topic, and we might save that question for later. But even the way he kills the suitors is polluting, self-polluting. That's why he has to fumigate the palace after he has punished the suitors. So he's positive only in the long run, and only because of the fact that the Odyssey is the shall we say, the twin of the Iliad in terms of viewing the Greek heroic personality. I know I have not satisfied all of the participants with this answer. This is such a big problem that it takes more. But for the moment, I hope, my friends, that you all see where I'm going, and that's what saves us here as anthropology, the anthropological take on what a trickster is. A trickster can illustrate bad things that happen, but the frame of the trickster story is still such that it teaches us how to be good, not to be bad.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question, which is for hour 10. Again, this is in Greg's voice. I have thought for a long time that the story of the land of the Lotus Eaters, that is Odyssey 9, 82 to 104, gives us a good way to understand the symbolism that we find embedded inside the Homeric Odyssey. Maybe I'm oversimplifying. Feel free to agree or disagree.
Can I just say that after all of my struggling with the first point, the first item, which was on 9, this one on 10 is so much easier for me. But let's give a hearing to our respondents first.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one participant is asking, does the story demonstrate the heroism of Odysseus, his determination and good thinking to save his companions and to go home?
Answer, yes. Yes. But what I worry about in this question is this question does not address, and I'm not being critical, I'm just saying that the way the question is asked makes the answer less easy than I think it is. Here's the situation, is if you just look at the words nostos, meaning safe homecoming, and noos, meaning a special kind of intelligence, a special kind of thinking, the idea is that if you don't have noos, that special kind of thinking, you're not going to have nostos, which is a homecoming. And this goes back to what I was arguing already in the book Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours already in hour 9, that noos, thinking, mind, is related even as a word to nostos, which is returning. And how about not just returning, but coming to, the way somebody who has fainted then comes to again and is alert again after being disconnected mentally to get reconnected mentally. So if the lotus is something that disconnects your thinking, well then if there's no thinking, then there's no homecoming. So that's why I think at its base, it's the most simple way of expressing the relationship of noos, mind, consciousness, and nostos, a safe homecoming, getting back to some kind of selfhood. If you're blanking out, you can't get home. Or maybe instead of blanking out, I like the color white here, blanking out. Or you could say, if your mind is darkened. In any case, if you're disconnected from thinking, you're disconnected from becoming familiar again.
I was just going to continue with that. It is between noos and nostos, if there's a line, Lotus Eaters, eating that is cutting that line, and there is no connection anymore.
Yes. Oh, I love the way you just said that, Janet. Yes, you're disconnected. The connectivity is gone. I shouldn't. Do you mind if I do a very quick anecdote? It is a dear friend of mine. Her name is Kelly Rourke, and she is the dramaturg for 2 very important opera projects. And she was telling me the story that once upon a time, she was projecting the super titles for the opera La Bohème by Puccini. And this dramaturg would do her own super titles. She would retranslate everything into English because she is that kind of a perfectionist, very, very bright person. So she was telling me that she ordinarily would use a PowerBook Mac, a Mac PowerBook, for the projecting of the super titles for her own translations of, in this case, Puccini's La Bohème, and she couldn't find a wall plug to plug her cord into because the projection apparatus was too far away. She figured, I can get away with it. I'll just use the battery. And so just as the character Mimi is singing in the last 5 minutes of her final aria, the subtitles get overwritten by an announcement from the PowerBook saying, "You're running out of power. You will terminate in 5 minutes." So to me, that's like, okay, no noos, no nostos. But the opera did finish just in time, so it had a happy ending. So and the super titles were saved.
Like that. Of course, a hero has to have his ending at just the right time, as we
very important.
Discussed very early on.
Very important.
One of the other thoughts that sort of come up, and it was something we touched on a little bit earlier as well, is the idea of this as being some sort of a trap. Yes. Or a trick that lures people in. And Odysseus himself has set traps. The horse, for example, is a good example of that. So, people are thinking in terms of the different ingredients of the story. Yes.
And could I say, I don't know, it's not, could I say? Well, I will say it. It's like an elementary version of the Odyssey versus a very complex version. So you have various different grades of understanding. And I must confess to you that the more I talk about it, the less simple it seems, because it's very hard to paraphrase. Once you get away from the formula, no noos, no nostos. Once you get away from those words and how I'd like to translate them in context, then suddenly it becomes harder and harder and harder, doesn't it? So I thought I wouldn't be struggling with this point that our participants raised, but I'm struggling again. And that's okay, because the Odyssey invites us to struggle mentally from A to Z. It's a sustained struggle.
And not straight from A to Z either. It
well,
takes
right.
Lots of twists and turns.
You're right. It's A, and then you zigzag before you get to B, and then you zigzag some more.
And delays and being lured into different situations, being delayed in different ways. There's all of those ingredients are in there, aren't they?
I think you inspire me, dear Sarah. It's almost like saying that the Odyssey is a messy zigzag line that's trying to straighten out.
Beautiful formulation.
and sort of straightens out at the end. But then when you think back on it, then your mind zigs and zags again.
Yeah, it's so rich. Well, thank you very much, Greg, as always. And
thank you, dear Sarah, and thank you, Janet, and thank you, Hélène. This has been so much fun. I find the Odyssey such a joy, even though it's a brain teaser. So it's like a puzzle.